In the world of medicine, where every decision can change lives, your peace of mind is crucial. This is where Pattern steps in. Imagine insurance made simple, fast, and personalized, just for you. With Pattern, you're not just getting disability and life insurance, you're insuring your future and protecting your greatest asset, your income. In the past 10 years, Pattern has transformed the way over 20,000 doctors secure their financial well-being. Discover the simplicity of securing your future at patternlife.com or click the link in the description. How does someone who knew nothing but medicine as a career since childhood grapple with leaving the profession? Hey, this is Brad Block, host of The Physician's Guide to Doctoring. This is a personal and professional development podcast for physicians where we have experts on the show that try to teach us everything we should have been learning while we were memorizing Krebs cycle. Welcome back to the podcast. On today's episode, we have Dr. David Weill, and give me a moment. It's going to take a little while to get through his CV because he is quite an accomplished individual. He's the former director of the Center for Advanced Lung Disease and Lung and Heart-Lung Transplant Program at Stanford. He is currently the principal of Weill Consulting Group, which focuses on improving the delivery of pulmonary ICU and transplant care. He's served on a variety of international and national roles, both in private and public sectors, and has authored numerous medical articles, book chapters, and editorials. And he's twice testified before the U.S. Senate about how various inhaled occupational exposures affect lung health. He's also appeared before various state legislatures and has lectured extensively national and internationally at major medical conferences and academic medical centers. And on top of all of that, he's written 2 books. He's written a memoir called Exhale, Hope, Healing, and a Life in Transplant that was published May of 2021. And his most recent novel that just came out in June is All That Really Matters. Dr. Weill, thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
So what we're going to be exploring today is the fact that you, for 20 years, you were a transplant surgeon. And then one day since you were a lung transplant surgeon, you did have a stethoscope, right, that you used from time to time. So at some point you hung up the scalpel and the stethoscope. So what I'd like to talk about is your journey into it and then your journey out of it, because a lot of times our identity ends up so wrapped up in our profession and some of us decide to leave, and that's okay. So that's what I want to explore today so we'll start with first your journey in, because you are the son of a doctor and a nurse. And so you became a doctor, right?
Yeah, not surprisingly, right? Yeah, a lot of medical talk around the kitchen table. And I'm the kind of guy that, as a little boy, rounded with my father on the weekends. I worked in hospitals beginning at age 15 all the way through. And I fell in love with transplant during my internship. There was actually an upper level resident who got sick on the kidney transplant service. And then there I showed up as an intern, and they needed somebody to do the scud work. And I raised my hand and I was hired.
Oh,
and
man.
We did a transplant the first night and took a patient that, hadn't been able to urinate in 11 years, put a new kidney in him. And next thing you know, I'm in love with transplant.
During your intern year, or like when you were like a college intern? Like, what do you mean intern?
During my internship, yeah. So
Okay.
A few weeks right after medical school.
Okay. I had to do a month of transplant when I was already in ENT. Our intern year, for some reason, rotated through transplant. I just remember that there were a lot of vac dressings, and that was, even though it was only a month, I think I lost a couple of pounds.
Yeah, it's rigorous.
So even before then, deciding to be a doctor, right? You're around it all the time. Do you feel like there was like a conscious decision to become a doctor, or because it was like almost presumed that this is what would happen?
I never really got any pressure per se from my parents to be a doctor. I just was around it all the time. And I never really, frankly, considered anything else. I wanted to do it since I was a kid.
Got it. That's what you were around. And so that's how you arrived at the decision. And so you went into, so we discussed how you chose transplant and something interesting. So your father, the pulmonologist, had a liver transplant, correct?
Yeah, he did. It was really early on in my career, and it changed quite a bit for me because I saw it from a patient side after all those years. I was only, I think, about 5 years into my own career But obviously having a family member undergo a transplant is a whole new ballgame, and you see it totally differently. But it impacted me for the rest of my career.
What was it that seeing it from the other side changed what you do? Like, what did you end up doing differently after that experience?
I think just more empathy for what the patients are going through, not only while they're waiting on the transplant, but what they have to do in the postoperative recovery, the questions that they have, the difficulty navigating the process. I think it made me a better doctor, frankly, to see that. He did really well after his transplant, which was great. And, I also got more connected to the field because I saw the magic of it, once again, with a family member this time where he was nearly on death's doorstep
Yeah.
and got a transplant. And then we got him for an extra 12 years.
Wow. Well, sounds like he's passed, so I'm sorry for your loss.
He has, yeah. Thank you.
So it's a pretty high stakes field, right? There are these amazing outcomes, right? As you mentioned, your first transplant experience, you put a new kidney in someone and they peed for the first time in 12 years. I'm sure the peeing is somewhat the exciting part, but I forgot who the nephrologist is online that says the byproduct of kidneys is not urine, it's homeostasis. The fact that they didn't need to go on dialysis anymore
Right.
was the miraculous part, right? You've got those amazing outcomes, but also you have the worst possible outcome, and it has to happen with some frequency.
Yeah. I think what eventually led me to walk away, theoretically toward the top of my career, or at least as high as I could get in my career, I, chose to walk away just because of the emotional roller coaster of it. We would save a patient in the morning, or we could lose one in the afternoon and have to get ready for a transplant that night. And that up and down is really eventually what got me to reconsider the field altogether and decide that for a lot of different reasons, it was time to go.
So sometimes people have outcomes that are beyond our control, right? Like an oncologist sees a patient that already has metastatic disease and there's really not much you can do. But then there are other things that happen, and anastomosis fails or something like that. So when you have issues like that, right, do you ever end up second guessing yourself? Like, maybe I shouldn't be doing this. Maybe I shouldn't be the one doing the surgery. If they had seen my mentor instead of me, maybe they would have had a different outcome. Do you ever find yourself, or previously, did you ever find yourself wrestling with that?
I didn't. My biggest wrestle is how long I was going to be able to devote 110% to it. I think even early on in my career, when I was right out of training, I recognized that I wasn't going to be able to do this for the rest of my normal working life. I walked out of the hospital when I was 52 years old. So, relatively young.
Yeah.
And I kind of had a sense that that was going to happen, that the way I was going about doing it, quite apart from how somebody else might, I knew that I wasn't going to be able to do that for, 30, 35, 40 years. I did 20, and that felt like 40 years.
Could there have been an option to go part-time instead of full-time, right? To try and hire other transplant surgeons with an eye on longevity?
I think there was an option, and I actually thought about that option, but I really decided that I knew one way to do it. I enjoyed doing it one way. I recognized that it was beating me up, and I wanted to actually take a completely different career tact. Rather than going part-time, I just decided I was going to walk out altogether and start chapter 2.
It's the end of another busy day. You just saw 20, 30 patients, maybe more. Instead of heading home for dinner with your spouse or playing with your kids, you now begin your night job, charting. Charting is critical for patient care, billing, and medical legal liability, but it steals our focus from our patients, eats away at our time with our families, and keeps us up at night. The burden of always having another chart to complete drains all of us. Freed listens, prepares your notes, and writes patient instructions for you. Charting is done before your patient walks out of the room. Wait, because it gets better. Freed learns your style over time. It's AI, just like a human scribe would, except it will never quit on you. Freed is loved by 3,000 plus clinicians from every specialty. It's HIPAA compliant, takes 30 seconds to learn, and costs only $99 a month. You can try Freed for free right now by going to freed.ai, Freed.ai. Listeners of the Physician's Guide to Doctoring can use the code PGD50 for $50 off the first month. And I just want to go back to that because the answer that you gave me surprised me. When there are patients that have adverse outcomes that are, as a surgeon, it's different than like choosing the right medication or something like that, right? A lot of it's technical skill, but sometimes you're going to have wound infections and sometimes like it's just inevitable by the volume. And, I just assume that sometimes people are going to say, maybe there's someone out there better than me. I guess in a field like yours, you kind of have to have a certain mindset of it's a good thing this patient came to see me because I'm at the top of the field and nobody does this better than me.
Yeah, it's not something that I really wrestled with. Mine were more existential, my
Yeah.
concerns. They were more about my placement in the field and how long I was going to be able to do it and making sure that a big team of people could all pull in the same direction. There were sort of more philosophical debates inside my head.
Okay. You already answered the question of what made you decide to stop practicing. When you did make that decision, was there any loss of identity, right? You had spent all this time, you're the child of a doctor who becomes a surgeon, and you're spending so much of your life doing this, right? Which is the reason you left, is because there wasn't time for anything else. How did you grapple with that change in identity once you stopped?
Yeah, that did take me by surprise. I mean, I knew that my identity was pretty wrapped up in what I did for a living, but I didn't really know how much. And I took the first year after I left California, we decided to move back to my hometown of New Orleans. And I coached eighth grade basketball. And I basically took a year where I was going to regroup, get some rest, and decide what I wanted to do next. I had some sense about what I wanted to do, but I was going to really take a sabbatical year, get reacquainted with my kids and my wife, and make sure that I was really carefully considering what was next for me. But yes, I mean, it was Tuesday, morning, and I was walking around the park that we lived nearby instead of, going off to see patients. So clearly I was a little bit lost.
Yeah.
But fortunately, I had something in mind that I wanted to do next, and, I ended up doing it.
And so what was that thing that you had in mind?
Well, I kind of took out a piece of paper and decided I'm going to do the things that I like and that I feel like I'm good at, and I'm not going to do the things I don't like and I'm not good at. And the things that I thought I could help with were making transplant programs perform better, whether it's clinically, administratively, financially. And I opened up a consulting group that does just that. We help transplant programs that are struggling for a variety of reasons, and we go in there and we try to fix them. And, we have clients from coast to coast, and I've got some international ones now, and I feel like that's in my wheelhouse. I know how to do that. I also wanted to write. I had a lot on my mind when I left the hospital, and so I wanted to write, and ended up publishing 2 books, as you mentioned in your introduction.
So how long has it been now since you retired?
I resist the word retirement, but 2016.
One of my friends is a ballerina, and she's no longer a ballerina, and so she retired. She refers to it as her retirement, and so I think
That's fair.
pivot's fine.
Yeah.
So I'm sorry, you said 2016?
Yes.
Is there anything that you miss about it?
Quite a bit. I mean, there's really 2 things. I mean, one is the one-on-one patient interaction, being able to talk with patients about getting a transplant, getting them on the waiting list, about trying to alleviate their concerns and fears. I do miss that part, the interaction. We got to know our patients really well. We got to know them for a long period of time and their families, and it was a close bond. And then the other part that I miss is, a lot of what I do now is a fairly solitary endeavor. I miss the team. We had 60 people on our team, and
Yeah.
I do miss having that kind of team around you all the time. That took a little bit of adjustment.
How did you start when you decided that this is what you were gonna do in your new career? Like, did you just open up an LLC? Did you talk to some people that were in transplant programs that might need your help? Like, where did you begin?
Well, I got hired initially when I left Stanford. I got hired by a couple of hospitals right away that were having some issues, and then it spread by word of mouth, really. And then I did start kind of letting certain people in the field know that I was available, but it's all done, word of mouth. I mean, what I do is so niche that you can't
Yeah.
exactly get a billboard and advertise,
No, but in terms of building your business, right?
Yeah, yeah,
The billing for like the nuts and bolts of it.
yeah.
Cause I think that sometimes some of us might have an idea, but we don't know where to begin in terms of like the actual process of starting a business.
Yeah, I mean, it's employee issues that are, the most, I think the most time consuming. The billing is fairly straightforward. I think it was more just the transplant community, and it's all solid organs. It's heart, lung, kidney, liver. Just being aware that I'm around and that I provide this kind of service. That's the main thing.
So marketing, that's something we all struggle with, getting yourself and your name out there, which is crazy because I mean, you must have been such a like the director of the Center for Advanced Lung, at Stanford. You must have been such a name in the field that and yet you still have to market yourself and make people aware that you're out there and doing this.
Yeah, I mean, I think I got a lot when I left Stanford. I had a lot of people in the field a lot of connections in the field. I think nearly all of them said, "Wow, you're leaving? I mean, what are you going to do now?" And so it gave me the opportunity to say what I was going
Yeah.
to do now. So that was kind of nice, It was kind of built-in marketing.
If you have someone like tons of us are struggling with these existential crises of is this the right thing for me? I decided to practice medicine when I was, a 10-year-old kid and I stuck with it. And now and now I'm 50 and I don't think it's the right thing for me anymore, but I've wrapped up all this time in it and my identity to it. So if you have someone who's grappling with the same thing that you were grappling with, right?
Yep.
What would you say to them?
Have a plan. I think your second act requires as much planning as your first act.
But
I
our
think
first act
that
didn't require much planning.
yeah,
We just
well,
applied, right?
you ended up having to, sort of go over several hurdles, even if you want to be a doctor, for instance. There are all these hurdles that you have to go through.
But the path is there, right?
The
The
pa-
path is, you have to take the MCATs
yes,
and study for these classes
yes,
and do the applications, but
yes.
you didn't have to make anything up.
True. I think though where I've seen, and I actually talk to a lot of folks that are thinking about exiting the field because I think they've read one of my books and they think that that I have some special knowledge of it. And just having done it, I personally don't think it's a great idea to leave medicine and then try to figure out what you're going to do.
Okay.
I think that it's more you've got to figure out, do you want to contribute something within the field? If so,
Yeah.
what are you good at and what do you like to do, And then you also have to figure out, I think one of the threshold questions for a lot of people that I talk to is, do you still need to make money? And I assume the answer for most people is yes. I think that's another important consideration.
So if you had to do it again, would you then go into part-time? Like maybe, I don't know if it's even possible, half-time, and then while you're building your business to offset that, keep some of your purpose, and then you didn't have that like it sounds like a train just suddenly, going 100 miles an hour and then suddenly stopping.
Yeah, I needed the train to stop, so I might have been somewhat unique in that way just because I
Yeah.
really wanted to stop the train altogether and get off. I think that if I had to do it again, I might keep my hand in the clinical arena, but it was more complicated for me because not only was I leaving I was leaving the hospital where I worked, I was actually leaving the state where I lived. I would then have to attach to another transplant program, and the situation here in New Orleans is a little complicated with regard to transplant. So for me, it would have been ideal if I could just kind of keep a hand in it, but that really wasn't available. And in fact,
Yeah.
I needed, especially for that first year, I really needed to stop the train altogether. I was leaking oil.
Well, tell us about the books.
So I had my first one came out. I started writing shortly after I left Stanford, and it's a memoir called Exhale. And I write about the emotional roller coaster doing this kind of work. I, like most doctor writers, I have patient stories within it, but I also tell in very personal and vivid detail about the impact all of this was having on me. And I found it cathartic to be able to write down all those thoughts that I was having about, falling in love with the field, sort of being disillusioned by, the losses and, not being able to tolerate losing patients anymore. I write about all of that. And then I didn't feel like I could go quite as far with that as I wanted to, so decided to make up a fictional story, a novel, and I published that called All That Really Matters, and it came out in June, where I actually, all of what I write about are very real circumstances within a hospital, but I fictionalized the story so that, folks wouldn't get mad at me if I had written it in a nonfiction form.
Well, that's an interesting way to phrase that. So now maybe some of those people might read it with a different perspective in mind.
Maybe so.
Maybe he is talking about me there.
That's right. I've actually had people that have read the novel call me up and say, I know I am so-and-so. And I'm like, you're not, actually.
Oh, that's interesting. And then they spend some time trying to figure out who that really is.
That's right.
Yeah. Oh, really interesting. So, well, Dr. Weill, thank you so much for your time and what you've contributed to medicine and are still contributing. So again, those books are Exhale, Hope, Healing, and A Life in Transplant that came out in May of 21, and then All That Really Matters that just came out this June. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Doctors dedicate our lives to caring for others. It's time someone took care of us. Visit patternlife.com to simplify your path to peace of mind. Patternlife.com, simplifying your insurance journey. Thanks for listening. I have a favor to ask. You listened to the episode until the end, which means you either fell asleep or you really liked the episode. So please share it or like it or comment on a social media post or write us a 5-star review. Something. It would really help me out. And maybe what you learned from this episode can help someone else too. The views expressed in this episode are those of the interviewer and interviewee and don't represent the views of their employer or even their significant other. Even though the magic of podcasting make it sound like I'm talking directly to you. This is not a doctor-patient relationship, and this is not medical advice, or financial advice, or really any advice. Thank us again for listening to The Physician's Guide to Doctoring.